to human nature, because the word talks about how in due time Christ died for the ungodly. Scarcely will one die for a righteous man, but God died, Christ died for the ungodly. So our understanding of the grace of God, we need to have that for ourselves to be able to extend and give that to someone else. So in conflict resolution, if you ever got anybody here got into a fight before?
What kind of time?
The other way, he's grabbed a lot, man.
Okay.
If you got into a fight before, right? If when you turn up, when you're about to fight, you can't turn that situation down or bring peace if that's not in you. If you don't know that peace, if you don't know that grace, you can't extend that to somebody to turn that situation down the other way. You're going to operate out of what you've been operating for and in your entire life, what you know, which might be violence, right? Typically, that's what human beings know: violence, retribution, revenge, right? We're going to get to some of Jesus' teaching, particularly in Matthew, around how to break that particular cycle. But we have to have the grace of God in us to be able to extend that to other people. Does that make sense? You guys track with me so far? Hopefully it makes sense a little bit. All right, so the more we understand God's grace towards us, the more likely we are to extend grace when wrong. The more we internalize God's faithfulness, His righteousness, His truthfulness, the more these principles will be evident in our lives. And this process happens supernaturally by the renewing of our minds in the Word of God and letting the new creation that exists on the inside seep out and exist on the outside, right? So again, it's that process of spending time with God and spending time in the Word and getting our minds renewed and letting it seep deep into our spirit so that it can come on the outside naturally in our interactions with our neighbor, right? So I'm really wrestling, though, like I said, with this text right now as it pertains to repaying evil for evil. So on a personal note, I can understand this very easily, right? So, well, I'm saying I can understand this easily, but Jen's probably going to throw something at me. I don't actually understand this easily. So in relationships or in friendships, sometimes you repay evil for evil. But in the end of the day, it's like, I can't do this because I'm living this particular space with this person. You know what I mean? It doesn't kind of make sense. If I want the situation to be healthy, for me to constantly be repaying evil for evil.
Wow.
But how do I process this in regards to enemies that I'm not in a relationship with, right? So how do I process this in the face of a society that continues, and in this context, I'm going to say, to devalue Black life, right? So I wrestle with this piece around not repaying evil for evil. Really, I'm just going to nail it on the head in light of what's happening in the situation of Ferguson in this country, right? So where, a situation of feeling as if Black and brown life doesn't matter, Black and brown life is able to be discarded kind of at will or at bay. How do I keep myself in a space to where I don't look to return what is being dished out or doled out by society? Does that make sense? Does that tension really make sense? So I can understand it in my personal life, but I'm really wrestling with it on a systemic level right now, right? So, but I'm bound by the gospel in a sense of a commitment to nonviolence, and so I just have to kind of be in the space of letting the Spirit continue to renew my mind and my spirit, so I don't act out in ways that I feel like I want to act out in. You know what I'm saying? That kind of makes sense, right? So when we're talking about, so another thing that I'm struggling with when we're talking about repaying evil for evil, because we're talking about, in many ways, talking about violence. We're talking about repaying evil for evil, whether that violence is physical, verbal, or psychological. And so what I wrestle with is, who has the ability to be violent, right? Does that make sense? Who has the ability to be violent? When is violence justified? And then when is violence looked at as evil, right? So many of us, all of us in the room, were around during 9/11, right? When 9/11 jumped off. Quick story, somebody raise your hand and tell me where you were when you heard that the towers were dropping. Typically, everybody knows where they were.
Exactly.
Somebody just want to share where they were really quickly?
At home watching the news.
John, where were you?
Yeah, I was actually at home, of course, watching the news, getting ready for school, going to City College. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was getting ready for work watching the news.
I was at work and I work for the state, and so we had word all over the state of California to close up, go home. You know, because of terrorists on state agencies.
Yeah. Marsha, where were you at?
I was at home getting ready for work, watching the news.
Yeah.
I had actually just flown in from Florida on a flight 2 hours before that.
Oh, so that was much more kind of hitting
Yes,
that
it was. I
home.
was like, what?
Yeah.
Like,
Wow,
that could have been me.
a tribute.
No?
Yeah. I mean, it quite literally could have
Yes.
been your plane. In that
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. Well, what was your feeling when you saw
Fear.
the towers drop? What did you
Fear,
feel?
yeah, fear and disbelief.
Disbelief.
Disbelief. That was a movie.
Okay.
I love the TV because I love the TV on. So I was like, what movie is this?
Okay. For real.
What other feelings did we have?
Fear.
My mom called me and woke me up, and she thought it was Armageddon. She was just like, the world is Revelations. It's happening right now. Get ready for the rapture.
Get ready for the rapture. That's the word, but give me right now.
The clothes are about to get left.
Catch you.
So when 9/11 happened, and I'll share my point about this here in a moment about who gets to wield violence and who gets to repay evil for evil when it's justified. When 9/11 happened, I remember I was in my room, and a good friend of mine, Seth Smith, gave me a call and was like, you know, someone attacked the towers. And I was like, man, that's crazy. You know what I'm saying? But I didn't believe him. I was like, that's crazy. So I turned it on, and one of the towers was just about to start falling, right? And I was like, man. I busted into my brother's room, to Paul's room, and I said, JP, man, I said, get up. I said, you know, somebody bombed the World Trade Center. And he was like, you know, for real, Bryson? He thought that I was joking about it, right? And then he goes, you know, for real, Bryson? And then he like hops out the bed, and then he turns it on and watching in disbelief. But I said it to say, I remember, I was at City College, so I remember going to school and feeling not only a sense of fear, but a deep feeling of anger and the desire for revenge, right? So I didn't live in New York, I didn't know anyone who got hit in New York, you know what I'm saying? But I had this deep feeling of wanting revenge and get back. And I remember all of my friends shared this same feeling, and even though if you really probed us, we didn't necessarily feel fully included in American society. If we were able to really kind of talk about how we kind of felt in relation to the state and for the probe of those questions, but we still felt this real need of revenge. And I remember even saying and feeling like, you know what, I hope they go through and they just bomb everybody, right? And we were all kind of saying that. We're like, I just hope that they just go through and they just bomb whoever did that just might. And we were like glorying in this message of American military might and the potential for us to just destroy an entire country. And then the rhetoric around it obviously wasn't just limited to City College. You remember, you know, the rhetoric around with our political officials, our elected officials. Everyone was championing revenge, right? Revenge and consumerism. You know, the president at the time told us to go and spend money, you know what I'm saying, so the economy can function right. And everyone geared up for war, and most people didn't have a problem with it, right? So, and what was sad about this process was that the primary champion of this were pastors and churches, right? They really championed this need of revenge, right? So you have where the United States is confronted with a violent act, and they can respond and return and repay evil for evil. But then on a domestic level, if you have people, whether they be local militias or local protesters or whatever they might be in different social movements, there's always this deep rhetoric of the need to be committed to nonviolence, right? So you have people who are, in fact, very violent, telling others that they have to remain nonviolent. And so I just really wrestle within that space, right? So it's kind of like, what does the gospel say? You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, so like the state is actually giving me an example that violence does solve problems, or seemingly solve problems, because it really doesn't solve problems. But they use it as an option. But then they tell people marginalized within their own boundaries to never use violence, to always remain peaceful, right? And so, and I'm just admitting to you as I'm processing this, as I said earlier, that so I need you to really pray for me, because I want my mind to stay rooted in the gospel message. And we're going to get into Jesus talking about not returning evil for evil as well, which Paul was drawing upon, so that my mind and my spirit doesn't orient to some of the feelings that I have in this particular moment. Does that make sense? You guys are committed to pray for me?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Yeah. Phil said, yeah, Phil believes me, but I'm so, yeah, so I appreciate that. Yeah. So the thing though about repaying evil for evil, whether that be in our personal relationships, like we said, protest or social movement, law enforcement agencies, state policy, foreign policy, this process of repayment, the process of violence doesn't ever end, right? If you repay evil for evil and you play tit for tat, that process doesn't end because there's not someone who breaks that chain and breaks that process of continued violence. If me and Jen get into it in our house, and we have, you know what I'm saying, and say Jen, say she roasts me, right? You know, I put the dishes away or something like that, and she roasts me. But then in my heart, I harbor that, and I say, well, you know what? I can't wait for the next time she does something I don't like, so that I can just repay her for what she did. But we just enter into a cycle with one another, right? I then drop that bomb on her, and she said, you know what, okay, he got me, but I'm gonna wait, I'm gonna get him on this next one. And then we just evolve into this cycle, this continued space of conflict, and neither one of us has the humility, the honesty, you know what I'm saying, to be able to humble ourselves and say, you know what, one of us has to break this cycle, or bringing someone from the outside to help us break this particular cycle because we're so caught up and trapped in it, right? And we do this in our personal relationships all the time. People drop bombs on one another, and then you do this for 4 or 5 years, and then you look up and you're far apart from people, friendships dissolve, marriages dissolve, because we stay in this process of repaying evil for evil and hurt for hurt. We do that on a personal level. We do that on a national and international level, where we stay in constant conflict with nations and repayment of in warfare, and we just continue in this particular cycle of violence that's completely and utterly unhealthy. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, but we have a word, and forgive me, actually I didn't mark it in my notes here, so one of you esteemed biblical scholars, aka Gabe, has to tell me what is in the book of Matthew. But here we have where Jesus is saying around an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? So I'm just gonna read it in my notes instead of in the word itself.
Matthew
So Jesus said, you heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not retaliate revengefully by evil means. But if anyone strikes you on the cheek, turn the other also. And if any one of you wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him the second. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse one who would borrow from you, right? So this notion of turning the other cheek, and I'm reading this over the last couple of days and reading this today, and I'm really saying this, I'm really struck. I'm like, man, I really don't want to talk about this particular passage because I really don't feel this way. You know what I'm saying? I really don't feel this way. But I feel like it was ordained of God for me to walk through this and to kind of see it and to refresh and to reground myself with this particular message. Because Lord knows if I had to choose something today, I've been talking about some good judgment, you know what I'm saying, and Amos, you know what I'm saying, or other passages or something like that. But I feel like God was really bringing me back to the heart of who He is in this space.
That was Matthew 5:38.
Thank you. Yeah, you're the esteemed biblical scholar of the day. Right. And so actually I was going to show some images, but I ended up feeling that I probably would be kind of divulging from the point that I was trying to communicate with today. But in Matthew chapter 5, I want to lift up something that ethicist Glenn Stassen, he just passed away a year ago. He was an ethicist at Fuller Seminary, and I got the opportunity to take a class with him in person and then online. And he has this process that he calls transformative initiatives that he sees in the gospel accounts. He calls them transformative initiatives, right? And so he says that there are 75 of these types of initiatives in the gospel accounts that we're watching closely. So they're broken up into triads, right? And so I'm going to use the Matthew 5 principle that our scholar lifted up, where my quote is found for us today. So the first part of the triad is that Jesus typically gives a traditional saying, right? Jesus gives a traditional saying. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? the second component of it, which marks kind of the vicious cycle, Jesus then says, "But I say to you, do not retaliate revengefully by evil means." And then he'll give a third component to it, which is the transformative initiative, as he would call it. "But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Right? So it's this, he's laying this out because he's saying that Jesus is really in the process of peacemaking. He's stepping in and breaking the cycles of violence that really mark our personal lives and our social constructs together, right? There's this process of violence that everyone really perpetuates in, whether in large amounts or in small amounts in our interactions. But everyone participates in in this cycle of creating this cultural cycle of violence. So Jesus is trying to break that cycle. And again, so there's three pieces. Usually, it's typically the way he lays it out is typically there's three ways. Jesus gives a traditional saying. Then he gives the vicious cycle of what that action looks like, and then he gives the transformative initiative. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
I just
So-
have one question.
Yeah, please, yeah.
The first word before the guy's name, ephesus?
Oh, Glenn.
No,
Glenn
what, I
Statsman.
don't know what that word is.
Oh, an ethicist.
An ethicist. I've
Ethicist.
never heard that.
Oh, yeah, he's a Christian ethicist. So he writes on
Ethics?
ethics, Christian ethics.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, the study of ethics. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry about that. I should have communicated that clearer. Right. And so, so we're going to break out some groups here in a second, but I think that that's crucial for us to talk about in a sense of not repaying evil for evil. That even though we created our own lives and our own situations, this kind of cycle of violence, and we contribute to that on a systemic level as well, we're not doomed to that, right? But through the teachings, the life of Jesus, through the cross and resurrection, we can actually break that cycle of violence that we contribute to. I think that's a part of the great hope of the gospel message, that we're not bound to the conditions that currently exist, but that we can be active peacemakers in our present moment, in our personal lives, our family lives, or in a bigger stage, if that's where God has us going to. So it's about breaking the cycle of violence. So I think this is another key piece too to talk about. This is really, again, I'm processing this with you because this is really, for me, this notion of turning the other cheek, right? I really struggled with that, the notion of turning the other cheek, because oftentimes it seems weak, and I like vacillate back and forth, like, it's strength, it's power, but then I'm like, man, it's kind of weak, you know what I'm saying? I'm getting kind of pumped, you know what I'm saying? Like, the more you think about it, it's kind of like, well, I mean, it's easy for Jesus to do that because he created everything, you know what I'm saying? So in the end, he has all power anyways, you know what I'm saying? So, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of easier, but then that would also probably make it much harder for him to take that from someone since he did create everything, right? You know what I mean? So, but I really wrestle with that, and I was wrestling with it the last couple of days, and I was going through Stassen's his work around kingdom ethics, and something that he talked about is that the notion of turning the other cheek, the reason it's not a notion of being inferior to the person is, he talks about the cultural context in which Jesus was actually ministering in, right? And so if you were to slap someone on their cheek with their left hand, right? If you were to backslap them on the cheek with the left hand, it's showing a sign of disrespect, not just for one, because you're getting slapped by a person, you know what I'm saying? But you're getting slapped with the dirty hand, right? With the hand that's used for daily things, right? It's kind of a dirty hand. So you're slapping this person on the right hand, on the right cheek, to disrespect them, to show that you are more superior to them. So in offering your other cheek to that person, you're actually not saying that, no, I'm inferior to you. You're saying, no, by me offering my cheek, I'm actually showing that we're on equal par with one another. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That we're actually on equal par with one another. And that if you're going to slap me, it's almost kind of strange, but if you're going to slap me, you're going to slap me as equals. You know what I'm saying? But I'm not inferior to you. So I'm going to turn the cheek of dignity and equality to you. And that cheek you hit because I'm on the same page as you are. I'm on the same status as you are. So in that sense, it's like, that really spoke to me. I'm not saying that it's fully sunk into me, you know what I mean? Because it's not like I'm really communicating, I'm processing this. But I know that it's true, it's just a matter of it sinking in deeper to my spirit. But then again, so it just shows how being peaceful is so subversive to the way of the world which deals in death, violence, and destruction. And some people, a group of people have to take steps in order to break that vicious cycle that we're trapped in. Does that make sense? It's like I'm going really fast, but so that's kind of where I'm at with that. So again, I really mean for you to pray for me in that space. But I'm actually interested, 7:36. I'm interested in hearing some things from you all. So if you can turn and in groups of three, here's a couple of questions that I would like you to talk with in your group, and then you can report back, and we'll have a dialogue at the end to conclude. But here are the 3 questions. What are some traditional sayings in our country that lead to division and violence in our lives and in our country as a whole? What are some traditional sayings that lead to division and violence in our lives and in our country as a whole, right? So you have here the traditional saying that Jesus was talking about that leads to a cycle of violence, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. A contemporary example, I mean, this is probably not a great example, but a saying of like, get rich or die trying, right? You know what I'm saying? A saying that leads to a continued cycle of violence, right? So kind of think in those terms. The second question is, what are some areas in your life where you are returning evil with evil, right? So what are some areas in your own life where you're repaying evil to someone who's returning it to you, right? So we're going to do a little self-examination with that. And then, in what areas in our society do you see this playing out? So in what areas in our society do you see the returning of evil for evil playing out? Does that make sense? Those 3 questions, can we break in groups and dialogue real quick and come back in maybe 10 minutes? Have the third one? Or all 3 of them? 2 and 3? Okay, cool. What are some areas in your life where you are returning evil with evil? And the third one, what are areas in our society where you see this playing out, where you see this tit for tat, returning evil for evil playing out in our society? Cool. Groups of 3. I have some feedback. So I could actually call on this group real quick. Yeah. I mean, what's your name, little bro? Aaron. Aaron. Yeah. So what did you guys talk about? Which maybe talk about one specific question. And instead of all 3, maybe the one that stood out the most.
Probably worldly things. Worldly things.
Yeah.
Probably worldly things. Also, things like legacy makers. Legacy makers. Probably something I couldn't do. I wouldn't say I took a lot of losses. Denied a lot of things just because I couldn't take it. So I got it.
Give my brother a round of applause. What's another, this group in the back? Marsha, which one would you like to lift up from which question?
Well, let me see. I don't know. We'll talk about the areas in life where we repay evil for evil, and we just kind of talked about it. And it's like I can take myself back to high school, where we had cliques or groups or whatever back then. It's like you talk about me, I'm gonna talk about you. To repaying evil for evil, or if they do something evil to us, then rather than being a peacemaker, we'll just stop talking to them or just cut you off. That type of thing. So.
We used to, when she talked about the school district brought back, we used to, in school, when I was growing up, we used to have CAP sessions.
Yeah.
Where we would actually get up in front of the classroom, you know, two people would get in front of the classroom, and we'd start dissing each other. You
That
know?
was before Common Core.
Yeah. Yeah. You know,
Curriculum.
that was
curriculum.
actually part of our English class.
Wow.
Yeah, you know, which always broke out into fights.
Right.
Which
You
turned
know,
into PE.
because of words that somebody said.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so it was always an unending thing. There never was a period to where you ended it until somebody threw the punch. And then that's when everybody got quiet and everybody started fighting. And then it would just escalate because it never did end. It was always a tit for tat. Always.
We're at 8:01. I'm gonna leave you with one question I just want you to think about in your own time. When we're talking about repaying evil for evil, we know the gospel calls us to be peacemakers. So I want you to think about in your downtime, what does it mean to be a peacemaker? What does that mean? And what does that look like? Right? That's for your own meditative time to think about. What does it mean to be a peacemaker? And what does that look like? All right. Thank you for having me. I always love coming and hanging out.
Thank you, Bryce. That challenge was. I appreciate it. So I think this is one of the, the ways in which, without question, I think our culture has influenced a Christian life in one of the most dramatic ways. So, and I think that Christians, you and me, I think this is one of the strongest ways in which we can sort of live out of our faith, but I think we fail to do it on so many different levels every day. Did you all have these like crazy examples of like where you're seeing evil repaying evil? Like, I mean, in society, in your own life, like we see it all the time, right? Through words, I see that a lot. Words, right? Someone says something, and you say something back.
Right?
Right? That's evil for evil, isn't it? Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. Sure is. You know, we see this a lot. This is why we've been challenged around, you know, you've heard me talk a lot about it, Bryce, and raised it again tonight, you know, around Ferguson and other things that come up over time where I'm just saying, hey, it seems like every time we talk about issues like this, they're so divisive, to Bryson's point, right? And so quickly, always, it doesn't take any time at all to identify two options for responding to a particular issue, right? So in Ferguson, what were the two options that were presented by your friends, by your family members, by the media? There are two ways you can respond to this. There are two sides to this bad boy, right? What are the two sides? For Ferguson, it was either
peace or...
there were two sides. Whose side is it? You're on Michael Brown's or on Darren Wilson's side?
Yeah.
Law enforcement or, right? I mean, that was it, right? And that's where all the arguments were. That's where all the arguments were. And so, you know, you had all these people on CNN and all these people on MSNBC and all these people, you know, on Fox and everywhere else, right? They're all talking about, well, you know, this is why Michael Brown's an idiot. And then everyone else says, this is why Darren Wilson's an idiot. And it's just idiot, 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 idiot. Name calling, right? I mean, what'd you call them? Cap sessions. These are they're basically cap sessions playing out over broadcast media, you know? And so it's very quick to identify that stuff. That's evil for evil. And Jesus is saying, there's a third way, y'all, that no one ever identifies. And that's why he is our Savior, because he saves us out of this vicious cycle of evil for evil. So Yasser was talking about, you know, a lot of times in the streets, right? I mean, gangs and whatnot, it's always one-upping, right? So you do this. My interest is not to match what you've done. I'm going to do a little bit more. Why? Why do I do more?
So I'll get back.
Because I want to win, and I want to make sure you understand that what you did, I can do more. I can do more. Let's be clear about that, right? And then you come back and say, oh, you thought you had the last word? I'm not just going to match what you did, I can do more than you. Right? Don't worry, I have more firepower than you. I have more people in my court than you. You know what I'm saying? It's evil for evil. With words we do this. Sometimes we go and find allies in order to pay evil for evil. We're like, hey, man, you know what Jose did to me? You know what I mean? You go find Bryson, man, you know what Jose said to me? Because it's not enough for me to just know for Jose and I just sort of have it out. Now I want to get Bryson on this.
Right, right.
So that Bryson also knows when he sees Jose, right? that it's not just Jose and I. Like Jose expects the cold shoulder from me. He didn't expect it from Bryson. But now he shows up at Bible study and Bryson's giving him the cold shoulder too. Jose's going, I don't know what happened. What's up, Bryson? What, everything okay between us? Yeah, everything's fine. You know what I mean? What happened? I brought him in because I'm repaying evil for evil. He did harm to me, but I want to make sure that he doesn't just pay for it with me, he pays for it with him too. You see what I'm saying? We do this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Turn people against you.
And what does Jesus say? Do not repay. And so I think the word that maybe Pastor Timothy was offering us a minute that I heard as you said, it was powerful. Pastor Timothy said in those old cap sessions that it would just kind of continue on, name calling until someone throw a blow, and then we'd all start fighting, right? And then it just kept escalating. There was just never an end to it. Do you understand now why Jesus says don't repay evil for evil? Because Jesus is in the business of bringing forth new life. He is in the business of redemption. There is no potential for redemption when we are repaying evil for evil. There's only potential for destruction. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So this is why he said it. So yeah, Tish.
No, I'm just saying,
Vince, you ready?
for myself, like, I came from a very, very violent family.
Yeah.
They love to fight.
Yeah.
But I would always get forced to fight because I would always say, well, what is this going to solve?
Yeah.
You know, and we know when your mom be like, you better get out there, I'm going to whoop your butt if you don't whoop her butt, like kind of thing. Right. I'd be like, but I'm going to fight her, and then what? She still don't like me, I don't like her. Like, there's no point in this. When does it, like, and I would always say that, but I would still have to fight. But I just always had a problem with that. I just never knew what was the purpose of us fighting. It's not going to solve anything. We're still going to hate each other. Just leave each other alone and walk the other way. Like, I don't know. That's just the way that I've always thought about things. That's probably why I've never had very many fights in my life.
It's good.
I just think it's pointless.
That's why the message of the gospel is so radical. That's why it's so radical. And while we live in our society that is living by the rules of evil for evil, right? We pay this for that. Do one better than somebody who did to you, right? And it creates everything that we hate about our world. We buy into it. And Jesus stands right in the middle of that world, and he says, nope. He says, you're not going to do it. If someone hurts you, you forgive them. How many times do you forgive them? 70 times? No, not 70, Jesus says. 70 times 7. He keeps saying in the midst of a society that is about holding grudges, that's about fighting, it's about paying evil for evil. It's why the gospel message is so radical. And if you want to know how he ultimately is going to bring about his kingdom in our world, it is through his people who would embrace this radical message, living out this radical message in a society that only knows evil for evil. That's how it changes. That's how his kingdom is made manifest in this earth. Is us not buying into that. This is life changing. This will change your family. This will disarm all of the powers at play. Right? Again, I'm quoting you lots in that, Pastor Timothy. Pastor Timothy often, reminds us, right, that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Right? But against what?
Spiritualities.
Principalities.
Powers,
right?
darkness.
Right?
Spiritual darkness,
Okay.
wickedness.
And so that's what we're fighting against. And if you want to disarm those powers, right, that only know how to fight on that level, better start following Jesus.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
That's what Satan does. Satan goes, I'll one up you, Jesus. Right? You try to take over my kingdom. He goes, I'm gonna one up you, I'm gonna give you the best shot I have. Right? I'm going to kill you. Right? I'm going to bring death to your life. And so he does. So Jesus, dies on the cross. It's the best blow Satan has, death. I'm going to kill you, right? Jesus dies on a cross. And sort of to just remind Satan that there is no greater blow, or that Satan doesn't have the greatest power in the world, but that Jesus has all authority in heaven and earth. He doesn't repay evil for evil, does he? Jesus doesn't come back with a vengeance and just destroy all of Satan, right? Satan and all his imps and everybody else. He does what? He just gets up.
Surprise!
That's good right there. Just get up.
He just gets
That's all
up.
you gotta do.
And he says, you can bring the best you have, which is death, and I will still have more, and I will not repay evil for evil.
Right.
Right? Isn't that powerful?
Yeah.
That's it.